they didn't think she'd show up. She was not expected to attend the wedding, not after the funeral. The decision was made prior to the tribunal. The actions they took were definitely not acceptable. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, just a wax seal she recognized from a childhood she didn't mourn anymore. The envelope was made of gold-embossed white linen paper, similar to the type her mother used for unread Christmas letters. She let it sit on the counter, unopened, for 4 days. It wasn't curiosity that got to her, it was the silence. Her hands hovered over it, not trembling, but not steady either. Inside, she already knew what she'd find. A wedding invitation. Handwritten. Formal. She acted as if the ties that bound her to them had not been weakened by time. She peeled back the seal and read it once, then again. Cordially invited to the union of Dr. James Whittaker and Miss Grace Hart. Her sister. Grace Hart. And James, of course it was James. He was the man Evelyn had once treated in a makeshift OR in Kandahar after an IED blast ripped through his convoy. His jaw had been shattered, his leg barely attached. She'd kept him alive for 11 hours straight. His first words to her when he woke were, "You didn't let me die." Now he was marrying the woman who told Evelyn she made the family look like a joke. The kicker, the card had been addressed to Dr. E. Hart. No title, no rank. She was simply treated with an anonymous courtesy. Her credentials were fine for saving strangers, but not for earning a place at the head table. The house she lived in now was silent, remote. The house, a cliffside rental, was located just west of Monterey, off Larkspur Ridge. The walls here didn't judge. The walls held only wind and light, and not much else. She liked it that way. Until that envelope. When she told no one and booked a flight to Boston anyway, she didn't pack out of sentiment. She packed for the trip like a soldier preparing for deployment, efficiently and without emotional attachment. One black dress, one pair of shoes. The old ribbon box remains locked, and the silver pin that had been gifted to her by a mother in Kabul, the one who had lost her son but kissed her fingers anyway. The airport was indifferent, just the way she liked it. Her boarding pass read E. Hart, the way every document had since she left the trauma hospital in Germany. Not captain, not doctor. She was simply a placeholder. Evelyn hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. This silence continued even after Evelyn declined the chair position at Johns Hopkins. Not after their father's heart attack, where Evelyn arrived 2 hours late and still wasn't allowed to speak at the service. "You always make everything about you," Grace had hissed at her by the hospital vending machine. Evelyn had just returned from 72 hours in a Syrian combat zone, blood still on her sleeves. No one had asked how she was. They just noticed she didn't cry at the graveside. The rehearsal dinner was at the Bayview Inn. Ivy on the windows, linen napkins folded into swans. Evelyn stood outside the entrance for 3 full minutes before walking in. The hostess greeted her with practiced warmth, but faltered when she read the name. "Oh, you're Grace's sister." Evelyn didn't correct her. She was escorted to table 9. She was not accompanied by her family. She was not accompanied by any family members or doctors. She was neatly tucked between the DJ booth and the emergency exit. Of course. Grace saw her first. She was in a blush satin dress, laughing with her sorority bridesmaids like none of them had ever sent hate mail to Evelyn's inbox during her second deployment. "Evelyn," she said, drawing out the name like it was still foreign. "You actually came." Evelyn gave a nod. Evelyn nodded, not out of politeness, but because there was no battle worth fighting in the foyer of a wedding.
You clean up. Surprised you didn't wear scrubs to match your usual vibe. There was that heart smile. White teeth, no sincerity. Evelyn didn't smile back. She leaned in. Just behave, okay, for Mom. She's been trying. That made Evelyn pause. Trying? Since when? Has her name been omitted from the obituary? When Evelyn opted for trauma medicine over pediatrics, Grace referred to her as a butcher. She didn't answer. She simply strolled to her seat, adopting a posture that still caused Marines to squirm in their triage tents. Dinner passed in a blur of clinking glasses and high-pitched toasts. The wine was excellent. The company wasn't. No one at her table asked what she did. One man asked if she worked in logistics at the VA. She nodded. The only person who noticed the ribbons tucked into her clutch was a boy of maybe 14 sitting 2 tables over. Her mother whispered something. He stopped looking. Evelyn let the silence grow. It was her old friend, her armor. James entered the room. He hadn't changed much, not in the ways that mattered. Still walked like his right leg was heavier than the left. He still scanned the room before entering, like he didn't trust corners. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, just nodded. Once. He nodded like a soldier. She raised her glass slightly. To what? She didn't know. Survival, maybe. Or irony. The final insult wasn't the seating chart. It wasn't the passive-aggressive toast. It was the fact that her mother hadn't said a single word to her since she arrived. They'd printed her name, E. Hart, on a table card with a typo. They'd spelt it Evelyn. No E. No honor. No weight. Just a missing letter in a room full of people who had once erased her entirely. She ran her finger over the card. She lifted her gaze to the sky. The room was full of laughter, but she'd brought the storm with her, and they didn't even see it coming.
The clock ticked in a language Evelyn didn't speak, or maybe she'd forgotten how to listen to it. Time had long since abandoned her, especially here, surrounded by the ghosts of things that should have been but never were. Her glass was half full, or was it half empty? Either way, the wine was tasty, smooth and warm, like a liquid lie that left a bitter aftertaste long after it was gone. Grace's laughter rippled across the room. Grace's voice resonated effortlessly, piercing the air like a blade without regard for its target. Evelyn's chair creaked beneath her as she shifted slightly, resting her elbow on the table, her hand curling around the base of her glass. She didn't mind the silence, though it had become oppressive. It had been with her for years, long before the wedding was even a whisper in the family. Silence had been a form of punishment. It was a silent command to remain invisible. From her seat, she watched Grace and James exchange words in the center of the room. As expected, Grace and James were a picture-perfect couple. Grace with her flawless skin and platinum smile, and James with his crisp suit, posture that still remembered combat, and a quiet dignity that now seemed to belong to everyone except her. Evelyn's fingers brushed against the napkin folded in front of her. The fork next to it, like everything else in this place, had experienced better times. The table was set with fine china, but it felt like a mockery. She struggled to find a sense of belonging. There was no place for her here. She felt unwelcome at this table, and in this family. It wasn't until the speeches began that she felt the weight of everything settle around her. A cousin stood first, Peter. His words were eloquent, rehearsed, nothing more than platitudes dressed up in formality. But they were heartfelt. The room nodded as if they all believed every word. And they probably did. She was used to it by now. The performances. The family had meticulously cultivated an aura of flawlessness throughout the years. "Here's to Grace," Peter said, raising his glass, the brightest star in the heart constellation. The applause was immediate, thunderous even. Grace beamed, her eyes sparkling. She took a moment to soak it all in before lowering her glass. Evelyn didn't join in. The clapping sounded like it was in a distant room, muscled by the weight of her thoughts. The next speech was from Grace's best friend, Anne.
Anne had always been the loud one, the one who somehow found her way into every conversation and every important family moment. And tonight, she was the one steering the conversation toward Evelyn. Although she didn't explicitly mention her name, the smile she directed at Evelyn set the tone. "So I heard from Grace that our dear Dr. Hart here has quite the reputation," Anne said with a laugh. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She didn't know what she was expecting, but it wasn't this. Not now. "Oh," someone asked from across the room, a voice rich with curiosity. "Yeah," Anne continued, "she's the woman who saved James's life. Of course, Grace doesn't want to talk about it, but I just think it's incredible." The room remained silent. She could feel their eyes on her, probing, analyzing. And then, finally, someone spoke her name, a name that had been buried beneath layers of silence and hurt. Her body stiffened as she forced a smile, her fingers curling tighter around her glass. "Dr. Hart, it's impressive, but I heard you didn't even get to take credit. That must have been tough." "Tough," she laughed and sighed. Tough didn't begin to describe what it had been like. She reflected on the years of sacrifice she had made, the toll. She shed tears for those who no longer acknowledged her presence. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "We can't have you tarnishing our good name, Evelyn." She could hear her, even from this distance. The audience chuckled nervously at Anne's attempt to ridicule her past. Grace was watching her now, her smile brittle, fake, hiding something darker beneath. She could see it in the way her sister's fingers trembled slightly as she held her wine glass. It wasn't fear. No, it was something worse. Regret. The kind that wasn't loud enough to be noticed, but sharp enough to make Evelyn wish she hadn't come at all. Dinner was almost over when her mother, Barbara, stood to make her own toast. Evelyn had expected the usual polished words, the kind that were rehearsed for days and then spat out in perfect precision. But Barbara surprised her. There were no grand declarations, there were no dramatic pauses. She didn't raise her glass high. Instead, she stood there with her hand resting lightly on the back of Grace's chair. Her face was a mask of practiced sincerity, her lips pulled back into a tight smile, the kind Evelyn had come to recognize as the mask of control. "To Grace," Barbara began, voice steady, "and James, who are embarking on a new chapter together." She paused, looking out over the room. "I've always known Grace would find someone worthy of her." Evelyn blinked, disoriented. Was it her, or had the tension in the room been building up until now? Her mother's gaze shifted briefly to Evelyn. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn believed she perceived something unusual, a flicker, a hesitation. Perhaps there was a hint of guilt. But then it was gone. The moment was shattered with a clink of Barbara's glass, and the room erupted into applause once more. Evelyn clapped along, but it felt empty, hollow. She set the glass down and rose from her seat. The night went on, a series of forced smiles and whispered words that never truly meant anything. The food was exquisite. The music was flawless. But Evelyn's mind was a battlefield, filled with memories and regrets that had no place in the warm, curated atmosphere of a family wedding. When it was over, Evelyn slipped out unnoticed, taking the back exit. She walked to her rental car, her steps slow and deliberate. Her head was full of questions. Her mind was overflowing with memories. She had to leave. She needed to leave for her own peace and sanity. But as she got into the car and slammed the door shut, she couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right choice in coming here. Had she truly concluded her involvement with them? Was she truly done with this life? Or had she just come here to remind them of who she had been? Maybe the truth would have to wait.
The night had ended, but the silence remained. Evelyn sat in the rental car, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly, as if holding on to something she couldn't define. She could still feel the weight of the evening, the cold laughter, and the weight of all the things that were never said. The wedding had been a parade of perfection, but underneath it, everything had felt broken, fractured beneath the veneer of normalcy. She started the engine, the hum of the car filling the space between her and the memories of the evening. The streets of Boston were alive, but to her, they felt distant. Her eyes scanned the unfamiliar landscape, the towering buildings, the flickering streetlights, and the hustle and bustle of the late-night crowd. It was all moving, all going somewhere, but she was stuck. The drive to her hotel was long, the streets blurred, the city lights flickering in her peripheral vision. She didn't need a map to get there, just muscle memory. The destination was a city she had spent too many years trying to escape, and yet always seemed to return to. She checked into the hotel without a word, barely registering the check-in clerk's polite smile. In the elevator, she stood still, watching the numbers climb higher, but she wasn't thinking about the floor. She was contemplating everything she had left behind, recalling each unsuccessful attempt to grasp something that was slipping away from her grasp. Evelyn hadn't spoken to her mother in years, not because she didn't try, but because every attempt had been like trying to push a boulder uphill, only for it to roll back down on top of her. And now, here she was, standing in the same city, at the same hotel, in the same broken family. She had left the life they had forced upon her. She had made a name for herself, earned her place in history, but none of that mattered when it came to them. Ultimately, she remained the woman who had been erased, still the woman who had been silenced. As she entered her room, the dim glow of the desk lamp was the only light. It cast long shadows on the walls, the only witness to her solitude. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, her suitcase still open on the floor, the memories inside it only half unpacked. Her eyes wandered to the window, to the view of the city below. The skyline was a labyrinth of glass and steel, but all she saw was a reflection of herself in the glass, a woman who had spent her life moving through shadows. She reached for her phone. There was a message from Simmons. "I heard you made it. I'm sure it wasn't easy. Call me when you can. There's something you should know." Evelyn hadn't expected a message from him. He'd always been there, quietly supporting her from afar, understanding the weight she carried better than anyone. He was the only individual who had never viewed her as a mere shadow. She pressed the call button. Simmons answered on the second ring. "You okay?" His voice was gruff, but there was a kindness beneath it. "I'm fine, just getting my bearings." There was a pause on the other end. Simmons wasn't one for small talk, and Evelyn didn't expect him to start now. "There's something you should know about James," he said, his tone serious. "I didn't want to bring it up over text, but I can't hold it back any longer." Evelyn stiffened. "What about him?" "He knows. He knows what Grace did. She attempted to destroy your career. I don't think you were ever meant to know this, but I'm not keeping it from you." Her pulse quickened, and she felt a sharp tug in her chest. "What do you mean he knows?" "He didn't just marry Grace out of love, Evelyn. He married her out of guilt." The words hit me like a slap, but Evelyn was too numb to react. Simmons continued. "He found out about the tip she sent in, the one that almost ruined your promotion. He knew all along, but he stayed silent. He was complicit in the lie, not out of malice, but out of fear of losing everything. He let her destroy you because it was easier, and now he's carrying that guilt." I felt the ground beneath my feet shift. I had spent years hating James for his silence, for the way that he had drifted away from me when I needed him the most. But now he had become part of the lie, and somehow that hurt more than any of the years of silence. I had no idea. I whispered, the words barely audible. Simmons' voice softened. "You don't have to forgive him, Evelyn, but maybe, just maybe, you should know the truth before you make any more decisions." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "What do you think I should do?" "Find your peace. Do what you need to do. And remember, you don't owe anyone anything. Not anymore. Not after everything they've taken from you." The line went quiet, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to breathe. The truth was heavy, but it was also freeing. The truth gave me power. It was a reminder that I was not the one who had been wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over in my mind, trying to piece together the fragments of a life that had been fractured long ago. The man who had once been my confidant, the man who had promised me that he would never leave me behind, had made the ultimate betrayal. He had chosen to stand by the woman who destroyed her, while he pretended that nothing was wrong. But that was the thing about truth. It couldn't be hidden forever. The next morning, Evelyn stood at the window again, looking out at the city, but this time she saw more than just the skyline. She saw the choices that lay ahead of her. She had the option to return to her peaceful life, abandon the past, or confront it directly. For the first time in a long time, she felt the urge to speak, to finally give voice to everything that had been suffocating her for years. And when she stepped out of her hotel room and into the streets of Boston, she was ready to face the ghosts, ready to take back what had been stolen from her. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about her. It was about reclaiming the woman she had lost along the way. The streets of Boston seemed to hum beneath Evelyn's feet as she stepped out into the cold morning air. The city was alive, bustling with energy, but for the first time in years, it felt like the noise was part of her. She didn't feel lost anymore. She felt present. She was a woman standing on the precipice of everything she had walked away from, yet for the first time, she was embracing the weight of her choices. The truth was a heavy thing. It had wrapped itself around her heart and squeezed until she couldn't breathe. But now, with every breath, she felt a little freer. The clarity in her mind pierced through a storm like sunlight. Evelyn didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't go back to the hotel. She needed to do something, anything, that would push her forward. For years, she had been trapped in the past, haunted by what her family had taken from her, by what they had forced her to bury in the name of loyalty, of silence. Now, she could feel the walls closing in on those old ghosts. She reached for her phone and typed a quick message to Simmons. "I'm heading to the base. I need to see something for myself." His response was immediate. "Be careful. It's not easy facing ghosts, Evelyn. But if you need to do it, I'll be here when you're done." The drive to the military base felt like an eternity, every mile dragging her further from the self-imposed exile she had created for herself. But each mile also brought her closer to the confrontation she needed. The base was quieter than usual as she pulled through the gates, the familiar hum of military life muted by her own racing thoughts. She hadn't been back since she was a captain, fresh out of the academy, ready to prove herself. Back then, she had been someone who wore her rank like armor, and believed in the system, in the mission. She had believed in everything they had told her about honor, duty, and sacrifice. Now, standing at the gates of the very institution she had once devoted herself to, it felt like she was stepping into a memory, one she could no longer recognize. Evelyn made her way to the main building, the echoes of her footsteps bouncing off the sterile walls. The guards at the front didn't even question her when she flashed her ID. They'd seen her before. They'd seen the woman who had led countless missions, who had saved lives, and who had left behind a trail of accomplishments that few could match. But what had they truly seen? Had they ever looked past the surface to see the woman beneath? She took the elevator up to the second floor, to the office where she had spent countless hours in meetings, drafting policies, signing documents, and staring at screens that blurred into one. It was the same office where she had fought her first battle for the truth, only to lose it to the very system she had once believed in. When she stepped into the office, the scent of stale coffee and paper filled her lungs. It was exactly how she remembered it. But this time, it felt different. It felt empty. Evelyn's eyes landed on the desk, the same one she had sat behind for years. But this time, the papers were different. The folders were old, yellowed with time. Nothing about them seemed important anymore. Except one, a file. The file was tucked away in the corner of the desk, its corners frayed with age. She reached for it, a familiar heaviness in her chest. Her fingers brushed over the name at the top. Her name, Dr. Evelyn Hart. The file was marked confidential. For a moment she hesitated. What was in it? What had they hidden from her all these years?
With a sharp breath, she opened the file. Inside were records, communications, memos, and reports. But there, tucked between two sheets of paper, was a letter that made her freeze. To whom it concerned, it began, "This letter serves as a formal notification of the termination of Dr. Evelyn Hart's candidacy for promotion to Brigadier General. It has come to our attention that certain discrepancies have been found in her service record, specifically regarding her role in Operation Helmand. A thorough investigation is currently underway." The letter went on, but Evelyn couldn't read it anymore. She had seen enough. The lies, the manipulation, the planned smear campaign prevented her from advancing in her career and realizing her full potential. She had known about the whispers. She had heard the rumors. But seeing it in black and white, seeing the words they had written to erase her, to erase everything she had fought for, it took the air from her lungs. She slammed the file shut, the sound of the paper cutting through the air like a gunshot. It was time to confront the truth definitively. She knew where to find him. James had always been the one to hold the pieces of her past together. He had been the one who had pulled her from the wreckage of that minefield in Helmand. But now he was the man who had married Grace, the woman who had betrayed her. Evelyn didn't know if she was angry or heartbroken. She didn't know if she was still in love with James or if that love had been buried beneath years of silence and betrayal. But she knew one thing. She needed answers. She needed to understand why he had stayed silent for all these years. She drove to his apartment, a small place on the outskirts of the city. When she arrived, she didn't knock. She didn't need to. The door was unlocked, just like it had always been. James was sitting in the living room, his back turned to her, staring out the window. He didn't turn when she entered, but the moment the door clicked behind her, he tensed. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice low. "I'm not here to talk about the wedding," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "I'm here to talk about everything else." He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in years. There was no smile, no greeting, just silence. "Why?" she questioned, her voice piercing the silence like a projectile. "Why? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me? You knew. You knew what Grace did. You knew what she did to my career, and you never said a word. Why?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked older than he remembered. Tired, worn down. "I didn't want to hurt you, Evelyn. I didn't want to be the one to tear you apart. Grace was the most important person in my life. I didn't want to lose her." "By destroying me?" Evelyn's words cut through him. "By keeping the truth from me? That's how you protect me? By letting me burn?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth hung in the air between them, heavy, unspoken. And Evelyn realized in that moment that this was the last time she would ever ask him why. She had already moved on. She had already become someone else. Someone stronger. And in that moment, she knew that she would never be the same woman who had walked into the wedding a few days ago. She wasn't broken anymore.
The truth had always been more complicated than Evelyn had ever wanted to admit. It wasn't a clean cut, like the blade of a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't as simple as understanding right from wrong. It was messy, tangled in years of deception, in lies that had been whispered behind her back, and in choices that had been made without her consent. But now, with the weight of everything laid bare, Evelyn finally felt a shift. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind howling around her, and knowing she could either step back into the past or leap forward into something new. She stood there in James' living room, the silence heavy between them. Her heart was no longer pounding with anger or heartbreak, but with something else, something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. The fire inside her wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It wasn't about winning back what had been stolen. It was about her reclaiming her place in the world. It was about discovering her voice and utilizing it effectively. "I think we're done here," Evelyn said, her voice steady. She didn't need answers anymore. She had long since stopped needing anyone's validation. What had happened between them, what had been between her and James, no longer mattered. She had already buried that version of herself, the one who had hoped for reconciliation and peace. It was over. James stood there, his expression unreadable, but she could see it in his eyes. Remorse, regret, something that resembled the remnants of the man she had once known. He didn't say anything as she walked to the door, but Evelyn didn't need him to. She didn't need him to apologize. She had spent too many years waiting for an apology from people who would never give it. She had to stop waiting. She had to start moving forward with or without them. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, she didn't feel relief. She felt something stronger. Freedom. It wasn't the kind of freedom that came with letting go of the past. It was the kind of freedom that came from realizing the power she had always held inside her. She wasn't just moving on from the past, she was rewriting it. Every step she took now would be her own. The next morning, Evelyn stood in front of a small crowd at the National Defense Symposium, her heart steady, her mind focused. This wasn't just a speech. This was a moment to make sure that the story she had lived wasn't buried under lies, wasn't erased by the family she had tried so hard to fit into. She stood at the podium, the familiar military garb she wore every day now, seeming like a part of her past, not her future. The sharp creases in her uniform, the rows of ribbons that had once been her shield, felt like they were no longer needed. Today, she wasn't wearing armor. Today, she was speaking her truth. Today, she spoke for the many men and women silenced by betrayal, family, and the systems that claimed to protect them. As the audience settled, Evelyn began, her voice strong and unwavering. I was once told that blood is thicker than water. I've learned that sometimes blood can poison the very thing it's supposed to nourish. She paused, letting the words sink in, before continuing. For years, I fought for a name that wasn't mine. I fought for respect I didn't receive. But it's not just about me. It's about the soldiers, officers, and men and women erased by those they trusted. They made unwavering sacrifices for their families and their country, only to face abandonment when the battle concluded. The room was quiet, the gravity of her words pressing in on every person present. The air felt thick with the weight of what she was saying. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't shy away from the truth. She couldn't afford to anymore. She continued, I've learned that the deepest wounds don't always come from the battlefield. Sometimes they come from the people closest to us. These are the people we trust the most, the ones we expect to have our backs. A murmur went through the crowd. People shifted in their seats. But Evelyn didn't lose her focus. She knew the truth had to be said, even if it made them uncomfortable, even if it forced them to confront the things they had ignored for too long. But we can't let those wounds define us, she said, her voice growing stronger. We can't let betrayal destroy us. We rise above it. We stand tall and we speak out for those who don't have a voice. We protect each other, not just from the enemy, but from the wounds we inflict on each other. The room was still, silent. It wasn't the applause Evelyn had expected, but it was something else, something more powerful. Later that day, after the symposium, Evelyn met with the lawmakers who had approached her about her proposal. The conversation was tense, but she didn't back down. She spoke passionately about the need for a legal framework to support those who had been betrayed within the military system. The Resilience Foundation wasn't just an idea, it was a movement. The movement aimed to safeguard individuals who faced silence and exclusion from the system due to their daring to gain visibility. The proposal was met with support, and the foundation was officially approved to move forward. It was a win, but it wasn't just a political victory. It was personal. It was the moment Evelyn had long awaited, the moment when she could finally seize control of her narrative, stand confidently, and declare that the past no longer defined her. She had done it. She had reclaimed her fire. Evelyn returned to Larkspur Ridge a few weeks later, the crisp air of the coast filling her lungs as she stepped out of her car. The little cliffside cottage felt like home, not because it was where she hid, but because it was where she rediscovered herself. She sat by the window, looking out over the ocean, the vast expanse stretching endlessly before her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt like she had carved a space for herself in the world, one that no one could take away. Her phone buzzed with a message from Simmons. It was short, but it said everything she needed to hear. "You've made your mark. The world sees you now. Keep walking." And she would. For the first time, Evelyn Hart was no longer walking alone.
What did you learn from the experience? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that even the deepest betrayals can ultimately lead to growth and renewal. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes losing what you thought you had is the beginning of finding something